Hey Optimancers, Chris here. Wild Shape is cool, but if you want to focus on Wild Shape at higher levels, then you really need to make some careful decisions at lower levels if you want to remain effective. Throughout this video, I will be making racial, spell, feat, and multiclass selections, and if it is not clear to you why I would make those selections, please check out my videos on those topics. They're all recent, and they were leading up to these build videos, and they're all linked in the video description. In my last build, I focused on the Fire Elemental, which meant it did fire damage, which is of limited reliability. Today's build will be relying largely on bludgeoning damage, which is very unreliable if it's not magical, and very reliable if it is. So the first thing we should address is whether it's magical or not. At 6th level, the Moon Druid receives Primal Strike, which says our attacks in Beast form count as magical for the purpose of overcoming resistance and immunity to non-magical attacks and damage. But when the Moon Druid achieves 10th level, they gain the option to wild shape into Elemental form instead of Beast form. So, as written, Primal Strike may not apply to our Elemental wild shape. However, according to sage advice, Primal Strike is intended to work with Elemental wild shape. For this build, I will be assuming Primal Strike is applied as intended. But you know what? Never hurts to verify with your DM beforehand, because otherwise that would be a pretty huge roadblock and we might want to consider a different character build. The Moon Druid Deathblow Tornado will be a fast-flying, whirling force of destruction with high damage strikes on our enemies. The Deathblow Tornado also retains more spellcasting power than my previous Moon Druid build, which was the Raging Inferno, allowing for a greater degree of spell support. This is also, by the way, the conclusion to my series on the Moon Druid and Wild Shape forms, so in the future, yes, I will finally be moving on to some different topics. Let's get into the build though. Beginning with our racial selection, look at the thumbnail, I'm probably focusing on the Air Elemental, meaning that racial flight is eventually going to be less important. But the theme of this build also involves the maximum mobility in combat. So for the Deathblow Tornado, I've settled on a less controversial pick than my last build, and I'm going with a Shatter Kai. The Shatter Kai gives us a lovely suite of features. Fey Ancestry provides advantage on saving throws to avoid or end the charm condition. Keen Senses gives us a free skill proficiency in a skill that we want to have. Trance gives us shorter long rests and provides a couple free weapon or tool proficiencies. And then we've got the big two. Necrotic Resistance is a great resistance to have. It's a common damage type for monsters to inflict, and as many resistances and immunities as the Air Elemental gets, Necrotic is not one of them. Then Blessing of the Raven Queen, which allows us to teleport with a bonus action, and since it's not a spell, we can do it while wild-shaped, and we also gain resistance to all damage types after we teleport until the start of our next turn. This is going to mesh really nicely with our build. Of course the Air Elemental is already fast, but throwing in a bonus action teleport means we can move in, we can attack, and then we can get out without requiring something like the mobility feat. Plus, we get that enhanced defensive element. I thought about ability scores for quite a while on this build. Today's build requires a minimum 13 in Wisdom, Strength, and Charisma. But of course, we don't want to ignore Dexterity and Constitution because we can't always be in Wild Shape form. I ended up taking the +2 and +1 option from Shatter Kai, and I placed the +2 in Wisdom and the +1 with Dexterity. This gave me final scores of 13 Strength, 14 Dexterity, 13 Constitution, 8 Intelligence, 16 Wisdom, and 13 Charisma. So these are the scores I eventually landed on, but if you wanted to have a higher Dexterity, or Constitution, or both, you do have the option here, and I did consider it, to lower the Wisdom score. A lot of our primary spellcasting isn't going to rely on Wisdom at all. So if you want to, for example, use your Shatter Kai Trance to gain proficiency in Heavy Crossbow, then have a 16 Dexterity for attacks, you could absolutely just switch the Dexterity and Wisdom scores here, and the build still works fine. And you will end up with a higher armor class at low levels when you aren't wild-shaped. With this build, we're not going to be messing around with multiclassing at all until after 10th level. That provides our elemental wild shape just as soon as we can possibly get it. And I'm going to move through these first 10 levels, at least in this video, pretty quickly. At level 2, we're going to be relying heavily on wild shape, and I suggest my best wild shape forms video linked in the video description to guide you through your best options at levels 2, 6, and 9. As well as highlighting why I think focusing on the Air Elemental form makes a lot of sense. When we aren't wild-shaped, we're going to be focusing on spellcasting, so let's take a quick look at the cantrips we want to select and the leveled spells we want to prepare. But keep in mind, Druid can switch out spell preparations after a long rest, so if some of these spells aren't working out for you, feel free to explore some other options. You can always go back later. The first cantrip we're going to be selecting is Magic Stone. This provides our standard attack cantrip from levels 1 through 4 and uses our spell attack for attack rolls, and since it adds our wisdom bonus to damage, it does more damage than other ranged cantrip options. I'd probably switch this out to another cantrip at level 8, using the optional Tasha's Class feature that allows cantrip swapping at ability score increase levels. What you change it to doesn't really matter. I mean, feel free to keep it if you like. Also at level 1, we select Guidance. It's just one of the best cantrips in the game, and at these lower levels, our concentration should normally be free to use. At level 4, I would add Thorn Whip. This is the point where we have spells like Spike Growth that combine really well with Force Movement. Thorn Whip pulls a creature 10 feet towards you, which actually works really well in tandem with party warlocks using Repelling Blast. So you're pushing and pulling the enemy over a Spike Growth spell. Then at 10th level, we get a 4th cantrip, and you know what, take what you like. I'm grabbing Frostbite, which has a longer range than our other cantrip options, and has the chance of inflicting disadvantage on the next enemy attack. At first level, I would be preparing Fairy Fire and Entangle as area of effect combat spells to cast, but I'd switch them out around the midway point. So let's look at the spell preparations for 10th level. Absorb Elements is a good spell to have ready for when you're not in Wild Shape. It provides a reaction resistance to a number of damage types. It's really useful if you're like fighting a dragon or a blasting mage. Good Berry is the best out of combat first level healing spell in the game, and depending on how your DM rules feeding good berries to allies, can also interact really well with a familiar in combat. Longstrider, it's practically a given as a casting before wild shaping at higher levels, and upcasting Longstrider to buff allies as well is a perfectly valid choice. Note that the plus 10 speed applies to all movement speeds, including our air elemental's flying speed. Pass Without Trace is a must-have Druid spell. Provides the entire party a flat plus 10 bonus to stealth checks. This is the optimal spell whenever you are in a situation where surprising an enemy is a possibility. Surprise turns hard combats into easy combats, and the chance of getting surprised with the Pass Without Trace spell is dramatically higher. Speaking of must-have spells, Spike Growth is another must-have spell. There are a lot of spells in the game, including available to Druids, where an enemy takes damage when they move into a certain area. But Spike Growth has the unique advantage of having no limit on how often this damage can occur. It's also difficult terrain, and a big enough area that if you have a party with some good range force movement options, like Repelling Blast and Thorn Whip, then you can really mess up a landlocked enemy, just pulling and pushing them around the middle of the spell until they're eventually just ripped apart. Revivify is really the standard when it comes to raising fallen party members, as it's the one that takes only one action and doesn't impose those lasting penalties that the other options do. It's worth at least one character in the party having this prepared. It also has a cheaper material component than the other raise options. I talked about Summon Fae in my last build video, and why I select it over Conjure Animals for Druid. The short of it is, I want my builds to be acceptable at most tables, and a lot of tables are not welcoming of Conjure Animals. Summon Fae is capable of delivering the damage we're looking for, and scales really well when upcast. And because of the longer duration of summon spells compared to a lot of other spells, and because the same summon creature can follow us from combat to combat, having a summon option available is very handy. However, with this build in particular, at level 10, we are going to be a flyer, and the Summon Fae is landlocked. So we need to take this into consideration and maybe pick up a flying option by level 10. I like to have a couple rituals to save spell slots. The first one I'm going to select is Water Breathing, a super long duration party-wide buff. You're not going to need it every day, but you're going to cast it every day regardless, because if you need it, then you got it. Then you got Divination, which is a really nice ritual. Basically, it's one free question to the DM regarding your actions for the next 7 days. What is going to be the biggest challenge in our quest to rescue the hostages? While exploring this dungeon, what traps should we be most on the lookout for? It's just free information. Fire Shield I talked a lot about with my last build. It has no concentration and a decent duration, which makes it an obvious casting before Wild Shape, particularly when it's providing the dual purpose of giving us resistance to a damage type we previously weren't resistant to, and delivers damage to enemies that attack us at close range. I consider this a must-have spell selection for a Moon Druid who uses Wild Shape at these levels. But unlike my last build, which could force an enemy to stick within that 5-foot range, I have no such tactic with this build, so it is very possible that creatures could attack me who have reach, and then they're not going to take the fire shield damage. So I am not going to calculate any of my damage from fire shield for this build, but I still would probably have fire shield up. Freedom of movement is also non-concentration with good duration, so it makes a great spell to layer up before wild shaping. Now as an air elemental, we will already be immune to the grappled and restrained conditions, but we're not going to be immune to paralyzation, such as from a hold monster spell, or a slow spell, or difficult terrain. And considering our character theme, I think this is on brand as well. Now Transmute Rock is a good spell to be casting when you're not in wild shape, though, Wall of Stone would also be a really strong pick if you prefer. In the case of Transmute Rock, if a landlocked creature gets stuck in the mud, it almost doesn't matter if they make their saving throw or not, because even if they aren't restrained, the movement of the enemy is hindered so much, they likely can't get out of this either way. Now for our final two spells, these are going to be our go-to concentration spells when wild-shaped after level 10. The first is our summoning spell, and we're switching out Summon Fae for Summon Draconic Spirit. Now another option, if you prefer, is Conjure Elemental, if you want to have two air elementals swarming around. But if you would prefer Conjure Elemental, forget the other spell I'm going to mention, and also forget my 8th level feat recommendation, and take Warcaster. Because if you cast Conjure Elemental, you do not want to lose concentration on that summoned elemental, because it turns on you. At least with Summon Draconic Spirit, if we lose concentration, it just disappears. Summon Draconic Spirit is also one of the more recent table-friendly summoning spells, and with a one-action casting, you can actually cast this and Wild Shape on round 1 of combat if you need to. The Draconic Spirit has a good 60-foot fly speed. It can also act as a mount for another party member if you wish. It has a good armor class for this kind of spell. I mean, look at it. It starts at 19, and if we upcast this, it will be higher. It has pretty decent hit points, 2 attacks, and a breath weapon when we cast it at 5th level, and you get to share an additional damage resistance with the summoned creature. You don't get magical attacks with this one, but we weren't getting magical attacks with any flying creature we could summon anyways. The other spell we might concentrate on is Guardian of Nature. This would be cast immediately before combat or on round 1. But if it is cast on round 1, we would need to wild shape with our action, which means on round 1 we're just setting up, which isn't ideal. But in those cases where we have a round to prep for combat, then this is a good choice. We would choose the Great Tree form, which gives us a few temporary hit points, but the big bullet points are that our dexterity-based attacks are made with advantage, and our constitution saving throws are also made with advantage, including our saving throws to maintain concentration on this spell. Meaning we are less likely to lose concentration on this than we are a summoning spell. I will be going through the math and the advantage of each choice later in this video. Now moving quickly through our class and subclass features, I took Insight and Survival as my class proficiencies. We already have Perception through Shadow Kai, and with my background I'd probably make sure to get Stealth as well. At 2nd level we get our Moon Druid subclass, allowing us to wild shape into CR1 forms, which at 2nd level are exceedingly powerful. But that does trail off as levels increase, and the scaling at level 6 and 9, they just don't keep up. So we need to combine Wild Shape with Summoning to continue to be effective. Level 4 we get our first ability score improvement, and surprise to nobody, I'm taking Resilient Constitution to bring our Constitution up to 14 and provide proficiency in Constitution saving throws. At 6th level, Primal Strike gives us magical attacks while Wild Shaped, and as I mentioned, although it specifies Beast form, the intention is that this works with elemental forms as well. Then at 8th level, we're going to grab Elven Accuracy and up our Charisma to 14. This means when we use Guardian of Nature, we will have that triple advantage. And with 2 air elemental attacks per round, we are going to have a 26% chance to score a critical hit on each of our turns. We want criticals. Now thanks to commenters on my Moon Druid feats video, they suggested, why am I not looking closer at Sentinel? So let's look a little closer at Sentinel, because although I've already finished this build, I think there is another way we could go that would build around the Sentinel feat. So the Sentinel feat, if we were to take that instead of Elven Accuracy here, it gives us 3 bullet points. When you hit a creature with an opportunity attack, the creature's speed becomes 0 for the rest of the turn. Creatures provoke opportunity attacks from you even if they take the disengage action before leaving your reach. And when a creature within 5 feet of you makes an attack against a target other than you, and that target doesn't have this feat, you can use your reaction to make a melee weapon attack against the attacking creature. And when I looked at this, I thought, whatever, we're super mobile, we're not necessarily tanking. But then I thought, if we were to use the Fire Shield spell I just mentioned in this video, there's no way to keep that enemy within 5 feet of us if it has reach. It can just back off and hit us. We might get an opportunity attack, but big deal. Now, with Sentinel, I'm thinking, what you could do is use the Sentinel feat and Fire Shield, move into 5 feet of the enemy, attack them, and then if they try to move away so that they're not hitting your Fire Shield when they attack you, then the Sentinel feat could come in, give them a speed of 0, they're stuck within 5 feet of you, and then when they attack you, they would be within that 5-foot range, so they would take the Fire Shield damage. Now, keep in mind that Fire Shield does either fire or cold damage. Those aren't the most reliable damage types. However, I think this tactic could work, so this is another way you could go with this build other than the methods that I have chosen, if you wanted to. Then at 10th level, we get the big one. Elemental Wild Shape, so now we can transform into an Air Elemental using both our uses of Wild Shape, which we recover after a short rest. I just want to give a brief reminder of our Air Elemental features. We have an armor class of 15, which is good for Wild Shape, but otherwise it's not great, so we will want to do something about that. Hit points are 90, higher than our base form. If we use Guardian of Nature, we'll also have 10 temporary hit points. Fly speed of 90 with Hover, make that 100 because we'll also have Longstrider. And an initiative modifier of +5. We have damage resistances to lightning and thunder, and bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing from non-magical attacks. Add in damage immunity to poison. Oh, and damage resistance to necrotic from Shadow Kai. And fire or cold from Fire Shield. And yet another damage type from our Draconic Spirit if we're using a summon. So, to sum up, immunity to 1 kind of damage, and we should be resistant to 7 more, possibly 8. We're almost at Raging Bear Totem Barbarian levels. And that's not even including the universal resistance if we are to use Blessing of the Raven Queen. Furthermore, we're going to have condition immunities galore. Exhausted, grappled, paralyzed, petrified, poisoned, prone, restrained, and unconscious. We have Dark Vision. We can speak. We can enter enemy spaces and move through spaces as narrow as 1 inch wide without squeezing. And we get 2 attacks at +8 to hit for about 14 points of damage each. We also have the Whirlwind action, though the saving throw isn't that high, so I wouldn't be making that a regular thing. In regards to damage, with these 2 attacks I would expect a 55% chance to hit using my damage baseline. My damage baseline is basically what armor class I would expect to face and how much damage I would expect a character who damages at least part of what they do should be doing. And if you want to be a damage-focused character, you should be doing well above this baseline damage. It is not uncommon to have builds that get to 50% over baseline, even 100% over baseline. So just our Air Elemental form, 55% chance to hit times 14 average damage for 7.7. 5% chance to crit would do an additional 9 points of damage, or 0.45. So that's 8.15 per attack. Then we have 2 attacks, so it's 16.3. And our baseline at level 10 is 17.7. So we're not that far below baseline, but we are below. So what do? We're going to supplement with spells. Now let's compare what happens with Guardian of Nature and Draconic Spirit. So first, let's say we have Guardian of Nature up. Well, our chance to hit skyrockets to 91% chance, times 14 average damage for 12.74. Then we have a 14% chance to crit, times 9 extra damage is 1.26. That means an even 14 damage per attack. With 2 attacks, that's 28 points of damage, 58% over baseline, perfectly respectable. However, let's look at our Draconic Spirit, which, remember, has a much, much longer duration. So the Draconic Spirit has a 50% chance to hit, times 12.5 average damage is 6.25. Then 5% chance to crit for 3.5, 0.18. So it's 6.43 per attack, and it gets 2 attacks if we're casting with a 5th level spell, which is the maximum we could do right now. So 12.86 damage. However, I would expect to hit resistance. Remember, this is non-magical damage, so I would expect this to be halved and fall to 6.43. However, we do add a breath weapon, which does 7 average damage, and assuming about a 50% chance to save, then we multiply by 0.75 for an additional 5.25 damage per round. So if we are to take our Air Elemental damage, which was 16.30, plus our Draconic Spirit damage, which is 11.68, we end up with 27.98. That is almost identical to the damage of Guardian of Nature. So at this point, really the only advantages of Guardian of Nature are, number one, you don't have an additional thing to take care of and move around on the battlefield, and number two, it is easier to maintain concentration on Guardian of Nature because we have advantage on Constitution saving throws. However, Summon Draconic Spirit is sitting pretty strong right now. I'd probably be using it the vast majority of the time. That will change. It is time to multiclass, and we begin with 2 levels in Paladin. So we get Divine Sense, goody. Lay on Hands, which is fine, but it's just 10 points worth. A fighting style, I recommend Blind Fighting. It's the only one that works. I mean, maybe works. Double check with your DM. You gotta know what this is all for. It's Divine Smite. We can't cast spells when we're in Wild Shape, but we have a ton of spell slots. I went over the interaction between smites and attacks while Wild Shape in my Wild Shape multiclassing video, so if you're wondering about smiting in Wild Shape, check out that video for the relevant rules. Anyways, I'm going to give some advice that I normally never give to Paladin builds. When you hit, feel free to blow them slots on smites. Of course, a smite is especially tasty on a critical hit. And what's the chance of critting with Guardian of Nature? 14%? That's not bad, but we can do better. So we take, our Hexblade dip, of course. Actually, we'll be taking Hexblade for 2 levels. But reason 1, Hexblade's Curse. We can curse our target with a bonus action, then come in swinging for 10% to crit, or with advantage. Let's do the math. 10% chance to crit means 90% chance not to crit. So it's 0.9 times 0.9 times 0.9 or 0.73. This means that on any individual hit using Elven Accuracy and Hexblade's Curse, we have a 27% chance to crit. And with 2 attacks, that means 47% of turns get us at least 1 crit. That's basically half the time. Now, generally, I am not a big fan of crit fishing, and nothing has changed. But it just happens to work well on this build. Any crit fishing build has 2 principles involved. Number 1, you need to increase your chance of scoring a critical. And number 2, you have to have damage that you can apply to a critical that is going to make the critical damage really effective. And in this case, we have Hexblade's Curse increasing our crit range and Elven Accuracy giving us triple advantage, so we have the big critical chance. And then we have Divine Smite, which doubles on a critical hit, allowing critical hits to deliver a ton of damage. We want a 2nd level of Warlock to get 2 invocations. The first is Armor of Shadows, so now our 15 armor class just jumped to a much more respectable 18. Now we could get Mage Armor through other means, but this way we get to keep those spell slots for smiting. And the second one we're going to choose is Eldritch Mind, so we will always have advantage on saving throws to keep our concentration. At 14th level, we will have 11 levels of regular spell progression and 2 Warlock levels. That gives us 6 first level spell slots, 2 recovered on a short rest, and 1 needed for a Long Strider pre-casting. Then 3 second level slots, 3 third level slots. Then we do have 3 4th level slots, but we might be using all of those on pre-casting. Then we get 2 5th level slots, and 1 6th level slot, probably for upcasting Summon Draconic Spirit. So we got a few of these for spells, but there is a lot left over for smiting. So let's look again at our Guardian of Nature damage. 91% chance to hit times 14 is 12.74. 14% chance to crit times 9 is 1.26. 14 per attack times 2 is 28. But now, let's say we smite on crits, and we would average, say, a 2nd level slot. So 14% of attacks will have an additional 68, or 27 on average. So 14% times 27 equals 3.78 times 2 attacks. That's 7.56 DPR, straight out added. So we are up to 35.56. But let's say it's a big fight. So now we want to spike our damage, so we use a bonus action to apply Hexblade's Curse. Well, our base damage increases by a proficiency bonus, which is plus 5, so 19. And our critical chance increases to 27%. 91% times 19 is 17.29. 27% times 36 is 9.72. That is 27.01 per attack, or 54.02 per round. Now that's like twice our baseline. But you know what? what if we were to use our 6th level slot and concentrate on Summon Draconic Spirit instead? Because if we don't have the chance to do that pre-combat setup, then we're losing our whole first round if we're going to use Guardian of Nature. Also, one of the advantages of using Guardian of Nature was that we got advantage on those concentration saving throws, but now that we have Eldritch Mind, it's just as easy for us to maintain concentration on Summon Draconic Spirit as it is on Guardian of Nature, making it more likely we'll get a decent duration. We're still going to smite on crits, of course, and maybe some smites on attacks without crits too. Let's say 20% of the time. I think overall, that would be a similar number of spell slots that we would see using Guardian of Nature, just smiting on crits. So our base Air Elemental form, 55% chance to hit times 14 is 7.7, 5% chance to crit times 36 because we're smiting 1.8. Then 20% of the time we'll add a smite for average 13.5 is 2.7. That is 12.2 per attack times 2 attacks is 24.4. Then we have a Draconic Spirit. It's 50% chance to hit times 12.5 or 6.25, 5% to crit, and that adds another 0.18. 6.43 per attack times 3 attacks now brings us to 19.29. Once again, we should expect resistance. So we drop all the way down to 9.65. Then we add our breath weapon, ends up being another 5.25. So what do we have? We have 9.65 plus 5.25 equals 14.9. Then our air elemental form is doing 24.4, so we average 39.3. Once again, this is pretty close to Guardian of Nature. So let's say we apply our Hexblade Curse here too. Do we still match up? Well, 55% times 19 equals 10.45. 10% times 36 equals 3.6. 20% of the time we're going to smite, so that's 13.5 equals 2.7. That's 16.75 per attack times 2 equals 33.5. And then we have our 33.5 plus 14.9 from Draconic Spirit, and that's 48.4. And that is still good damage. It's 82% over baseline, but only against the target of our Hexblade's Curse. Otherwise, it's 48% over. But with our Guardian of Nature, we're sitting just at 34% over. But if we apply Hexblade's Curse, now we're 103% over. So when do we want to use Guardian of Nature? When we have that round to set up, and it's the big fight, and we're going to be using Hexblade's Curse. Now, one of the common comments I got on my Wild Shape Forums video is that a lot of you liked the other elementals, particularly the Earth Elemental. Well, with this build, if you prefer to use the Earth Glide or the Earth Elemental, or you're in the water and you want to use the Water Elemental, you won't get Elven Accuracy triple advantage, because those both use Strength for attacks. But the Guardian of Nature spell gives you an extra d6 damage per Strength-based attack when you use the Primal Beast form, which keeps you in a pretty good position. And regular advantage plus Hexblade's Curse and Smites is still quite strong. So your damage isn't quite as high, but it doesn't suffer too much. So this build works with Air Elemental, but it also works with Earth Elemental and Water Elemental if you prefer. The only one it doesn't really work that great with is the Fire Elemental, and if you want to use Fire Elemental, check out my last video. So the Deathblow Tornado is zipping around the battlefield at a 100-foot movement speed, teleporting as a bonus action, has resistance to most kinds of damage, sometimes all kinds of damage, resistance to all kinds of conditions, a good armor class, and hard hitting. And that is with a build that ends at 15th level. Naturally, with all Moon Druids at 2nd level, you are going to be very, very powerful, probably the most powerful character in your party. Then as levels progress, and I illustrated this a bit more in my last video, you're going to be taking forms that aren't really scaling at the same level the other party members are, so you're going to rely more and more on probably that Summon Phase spell to be delivering decent damage in combat. Then at level 10, we get our big Air Elemental form. We'll probably want to switch to a flying summon creature like the Summon Draconic Spirit, which would probably be the spell I cast most of the time that uses my concentration. Then after 2 Paladin levels, that's when our damage explodes, because we got those spell slots to fuel those smites hit after hit after hit. Then to ramp it up even to a higher level, we're going to have Hexblade Curse for that once per short rest, super crit fishing, hard hitting, fast moving, high defense build. And that concludes my series on the Moon Druid. If you have some great build ideas for Moon Druids, please share them with all of us in the comment section down below. Otherwise, until next time, I am going to sit back, relax, and have some fun. D&D is for everyone. Thanks everybody, and I'll talk to you soon.